You have been watching a fairly high wattage press conference there in the Brady briefing room with President Donald Trump, two cabinet secretaries, and a brief appearance even from Vice President J.D. Vance. The press conference began, as one might expect, with condolences and sorrow, words of comfort to the families of the 67 people believed to be dead at this hour after that midair collision. And then the conversation turned, the president turned the conversation to what might have happened. He called it a confluence of bad decisions. And then the bulk of the commentary was about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and an executive order that he signed a few days ago that he says corrected an FAA policy that was hiring people who were not qualified to be air traffic controllers. But then at another point, he said didn't blame the air traffic controllers necessarily. And he seemed to, in fact, be blaming maybe the pilots of the Army helicopter. They were on the wrong path. He said they should have seen. It wasn't really clear by the end, as I turned to our Ed O'Keefe here, who was listening along with me, what the president thought in a firm way was at fault at this hour. He said it could have been. He said he had common sense. Didn't seem like he had firm conclusions, Ed.
No, Tony, he seemed to be jumping to conclusions before an investigation begins, saying, I'm going to express my opinions, knowing that it could take several years for an investigation to be completed. Let's convey two pieces of information he shared. First, he assured the flying public they should fly. Second, that there will be a, quote, systematic investigation led by the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board, the Defense Department, to review what went on. And he did name an acting administrator at the Federal Aviation Administration, a guy named Chris Rochelo, a 22-year veteran who had been serving in a sort of active or acting role over the last several weeks because the then administrator and deputy quit earlier this month ahead of the Trump inauguration, knowing they'd probably lose their job anyway. But this focus on diversity, equity, inclusion programs is part of a big revamp of the federal policy and federal government that's underway, going into agencies and saying, if you've got any of these programs, they're being canceled. The people that run them are being put on paid leave for now, believing that across the federal government there's been too much focus on those kinds of issues and not on the actual work of the agencies themselves. Whether he's inferring here that somebody was in fact hired through that program is unclear, but he's at least using that as one scapegoat in the early hours of this investigation. Tony.
Yeah, it certainly sounded that way, Ed. You know, I'm reminded of the fact that from 2009, the last deadly crash like this, to this one, you had 4 different presidents who oversaw a remarkable stretch of safety in the skies. They shared leadership during that time.
We have been told that there are no survivors. We mourn with all those who have been impacted.
Mayor Lily Wu emotionally reacting after learning nearly 70 people are believed dead after an American Airlines passenger plane traveling from Wichita to the Reagan International Airport collided with a military chopper last night. Thank you for joining us here on CBS News Detroit. I'm Lauren Winfrey. That plane was carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members, while officials say 3 soldiers were on board that helicopter. Natalie Brand has the latest from Reagan International Airport in Virginia.
Washington, D.C.'s fire chief says the rescue mission in the Potomac River has now turned to a recovery operation.
At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident.
Earthcam video shows the moment a commercial passenger jet and an Army helicopter collided in midair just before 9 p.m. near Reagan National Airport outside Washington, D.C.
Both the helicopter and the plane crashed in the river.
Video obtained by CBS News shows what air traffic controllers would have seen. The Black Hawk at the top of the screen appears to move directly in the path of the jet operated by PSA Airlines.
We don't know why the military aircraft came into the path of the PSA aircraft.
President Donald Trump is pushing for an explanation.
We'll find out how this disaster occurred and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again.
The Army says the Black Hawk helicopter was on a training flight with 3 service members on board. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said on social media that the DoD is actively investigating.
It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation.
This is the first major commercial crash in the United States in around 16 years. Officials are hoping the black box flight recorder helps investigators figure out what happened.
Anytime you have two airplanes close together, they will then go to visual separation. The real question, of course, is why did that visual separation break down to this disaster that we have right now?
A number of figure skaters, along with their coaches and parents, were among those on board the plane, including 6 people from the Skating Club of Boston.
2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and the athletes' moms. It's a close, tight bond, and I think for all of us, we have lost family.
In a statement, U.S. Figure Skating says, quote, "We are devastated by this unspeakable tragedy and hold the victims' families closely in our hearts." Natalie Brand, CBS News, Reagan National Airport.